The gunshot that rang out through the Red River Saloon on that sweltering July evening in 1876 was not meant to kill, but it changed everything for Evangeline Carter nonetheless. She stood behind the bar with smoke curling from the derringer in her trembling hand, watching as Jack's snake eyes. Morrison clutched his shoulder and howled in pain. The card sharp had tried to drag her upstairs by force after losing his last dollar at poker, and she had done what any woman in her position would do. She had defended herself. But in a town like Redemption, Texas, a saloon girl who shot a customer was not seen as a victim. She was seen as a problem. The sheriff came within minutes, his boots heavy on the wooden floorboards. He looked at Snake Eyes, then at Evangeline, then at the small pistol still in her grip. "You are coming with me," he said, not unkindly but firm. She went without protest because she knew the alternative was letting the angry crowd that had gathered decide her fate, and that would be far worse. 3 days later, she sat in a cell that smelled of dust and desperation, waiting to hear what would become of her. Snake Eyes would live, the doctor had confirmed, but his pride was wounded worse than his shoulder. He wanted her punished. He wanted her hanged. The whole town seemed to buzz with opinions about what should happen to the scarlet woman who had dared to defend her dignity. Marshall Davies, a grizzled man with more sense than most, had other ideas. "You are not going to hang," he told her on the third morning. "Snake Eyes was known to be rough with women. There are witnesses who saw him grab you, but you cannot stay in Redemption. The judge is giving you a choice. Leave town by sunset tomorrow or spend 6 months in the territorial prison." Evangeline felt relief and terror in equal measure. She had nowhere to go, no family, no prospects. She had been working at the Red River for 2 years, saving every penny she could, but it was not nearly enough to start over somewhere respectable. Still, anything was better than prison. "I will leave," she said quietly. That afternoon, as she gathered her few belongings in the cramped room above the saloon, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a man she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in springtime. He wore dusty traveling clothes and a worn hat, and he held that hat in his hands as he stood in her doorway. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice low and respectful. "My name is Caleb Morgan. I heard about your trouble." "Everyone has heard about my trouble," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "What do you want?" "I want to help you," she laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Caleb said. "I know Snake Eyes is a bastard who has hurt more than one woman in this territory. I know you did what you had to do, and I know what it is like to have nowhere to go." Evangeline studied him, looking for the catch. Men did not help women like her without expecting something in return. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you are not willing to give," he said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I have a ranch about 30 miles north of here. It is not much, but it is mine. I need help running it. You need a place to go. I am offering you honest work for honest pay. You would have your own room in the house. No expectations beyond helping with cooking and mending and maybe tending the vegetable garden." "Why would you do this?" she asked again, searching his face for deception. "Because I think everyone deserves a second chance," Caleb said simply. "And because I do not have much use for a town that blames a woman for defending herself." She wanted to trust him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone in this world could be kind without wanting something in return, but years of hard living had taught her to be careful. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough," he said. "I will be leaving at dawn tomorrow. If you want to come, meet me at the livery stable. If you do not show up, I will understand." He left her there, and she spent the rest of the day and most of the night wrestling with her decision. She could take what little money she had and try to make it to another town, start over somewhere nobody knew her name. But word traveled fast in Texas, and saloon girls who shot customers tended to develop reputations that followed them. Or she could trust this stranger, this Caleb Morgan, and hope that he was as decent as he seemed. In the end, it was not really a choice at all. She had no better options. She was at the livery stable before dawn, her belongings packed in a single carpet bag. Caleb was already there, saddling a sturdy-looking bay horse. When he saw her, something that might have been relief crossed his face. "I was not sure you would come," he admitted. "I was not sure I would either," she replied. He helped her up onto a gentle mare named Rosie, and they rode out of Redemption as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. Evangeline did not look back. There was nothing in that town she wanted to remember. The ride to Caleb's ranch took most of the day. They stopped twice to rest the horses and eat the bread and cheese he had packed. He did not talk much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind. He told her about his ranch, about how he had built it from nothing over the past 5 years. He told her about his plans to expand his herd, to maybe build a proper barn next spring. He talked about the land with a love that was evident in every word, and despite herself, Evangeline felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was setting. It was modest, as he had said. A small house built of weathered wood, a corral, a lean-to that served as a barn, but it was neat and well-kept, and the land around it was beautiful. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, covered in prairie grass that whispered in the evening breeze. A creek ran through the property, its water clear and cold. "It is not much," Caleb said, sounding almost apologetic. "It is beautiful," Evangeline said, and she meant it. He showed her to her room, a small but clean space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the hills. "I will give you time to settle in," he said. "I am going to tend to the horses. Come down when you are ready and I will fix us some supper." She unpacked her few belongings, changed out of her travel-stained dress into something cleaner, and then went downstairs. The main room of the house was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was a table with 2 chairs, a few shelves of books, and a rocking chair by the window. Caleb was at the stove, frying bacon and eggs with the ease of someone who had been cooking for himself for a long time. "Sit down," he said. "It is almost ready." They ate in comfortable silence at first. The food was simple but good, and Evangeline realized she had not had a proper meal in days. Finally, she gathered her courage and asked the question that had been nagging at her all day. "Why are you really doing this? And please do not tell me it is just because you need help around the ranch. You could have hired any number of respectable women from town." Caleb set down his fork and looked at her for a long moment. "My sister was a saloon girl," he said finally. "In Abilene, she got herself into trouble with a man who would not take no for an answer. When she fought back, the town turned on her. She left, trying to make it to Kansas City, but she did not make it. She died on the road, alone and scared and thinking the whole world had abandoned her." Evangeline felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry." "I am sorry too," Caleb said. "Sorry I was not there to help her. Sorry she felt she had no one to turn to. When I heard about what happened to you, about how that bastard tried to force you and then wanted you punished for defending yourself, all I could think about was Sarah. I could not help her, but maybe I could help you." "You did not have to do that," Evangeline said softly. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I wanted to." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Evangeline rose early each morning to make breakfast while Caleb tended to the horses and cattle. She cleaned and mended and tended the small vegetable garden behind the house. In the afternoons, she often helped him with the animals, learning how to care for them, how to recognize when one was sick or injured. He was patient with her, teaching her without condescension, and she found herself enjoying the work in a way she had never enjoyed anything before. In the evenings, they would sit together after supper, sometimes reading, sometimes just talking. Caleb had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and she found herself laughing more than she had in years. He told her stories about his time as a ranch hand before he had saved enough to buy his own land, about the characters he had met and the places he had seen. She told him carefully edited versions of her own past, leaving out the worst parts, and he never pressed her for more than she was willing to share. Summer gave way to autumn, and the hills around the ranch turned gold and amber. Evangeline had been there for 3 months, and she had never felt more at peace. She was starting to feel like she belonged here, like this place could be a home. But she was also starting to feel something else, something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Caleb Morgan. It happened slowly, so gradually she did not notice until it was too late to stop it. The way he smiled at her over breakfast. The way he always made sure she had the more comfortable chair by the fire on cold evenings. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with something warm and tender in his eyes. The way her heart would skip when their hands accidentally touched, when he helped her down from her horse or reached past her for something in the kitchen. She tried to convince herself it was just gratitude. He had saved her, given her a home, treated her with more kindness than she had known in years. Of course she felt something for him. But it was more than gratitude, and she knew it. The problem was that she had no idea how he felt. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but he had never once crossed the line between employer and employee. He had never touched her inappropriately, never made any suggestion that he wanted more from her than what they had agreed upon, and she could not blame him. She was a saloon girl with a reputation, a woman who had shot a man. What respectable rancher would want to tie himself to someone like her? October brought the first real cold snap, and with it, a visitor. Evangeline was hanging laundry when she saw the buggy coming up the road. Caleb was out checking the fence line in the north pasture, so she was alone when the visitor arrived. The man who climbed down from the buggy was dressed all in black, with a white collar that marked him as a preacher. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver hair and a stern face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Good afternoon," Evangeline said politely, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for Caleb Morgan," the man said, his voice cold and formal. "He is out on the property. He should be back within the hour. Would you like to wait?" The preacher's eyes swept over her, and she saw the recognition dawn in them. "You are the woman from Redemption," he said. "The saloon girl who shot a man." Evangeline felt her spine stiffen. "I am Evangeline Carter, and I shot a man who was trying to assault me." "I am Reverend Samuel Blackwood," he said. "I have just been appointed to the church in Redemption, and I have been making my rounds to meet the families in the area. I had heard that Caleb Morgan was a God-fearing man who might be an asset to our congregation. I did not realize he was harboring a woman of ill repute." "I am not a woman of ill repute," Evangeline said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I am a housekeeper." "I know what you are," Blackwood said, "and I know what you did. It is my duty as a man of God to warn Mr. Morgan about the sort of influence you might have on him and on this community." Before Evangeline could respond, she heard hoofbeats. Caleb rode into the yard, and his expression darkened when he saw Blackwood. "Reverend," he said, dismounting, "what brings you out here?" "I came to introduce myself and to invite you to services," Blackwood said. "But I find myself instead needing to express my concern about the living arrangements I have discovered here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What arrangements would those be? You have an unmarried woman living in your house, a woman with a sordid past." "Surely you can see how this appears, Mr. Morgan. It is unseemly, it is sinful." "Miss Carter is my housekeeper," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She works for me, that is all." "Nevertheless, the appearance of impropriety is itself a sin," Blackwood insisted. "If you wish to be welcomed in the church, if you wish to be seen as a respectable member of this community, you cannot continue this arrangement. The woman must go." Evangeline felt something inside her break. She had known it was too good to be true. She had known that her past would catch up with her eventually. She turned to go into the house, ready to pack her bag once again, but Caleb's voice stopped her. "Evangeline, wait." She turned back. Caleb was looking at her, not at the preacher, and there was something fierce and determined in his eyes. "What if we were married?" he said. "Would that satisfy your concerns about impropriety, Reverend?" Blackwood's face twisted. You cannot be serious. You would marry a woman like her." "A woman like her?" Caleb's voice was sharp now. "You mean a woman who has worked harder than anyone I have ever known, a woman who has survived things you cannot imagine, a woman who has more courage and decency than most people I have met." "I mean a soiled woman," Blackwood said bluntly. "A woman who has lived in sin, who has shot a man, who has consorted with gamblers and drunkards. Such a woman is not fit to be any decent man's wife. I could not in good conscience perform such a marriage, and no other preacher would either." "Then I do not need a preacher," Caleb said. He turned to Evangeline, and the world seemed to narrow until it was just the two of them. "Evangeline Carter, I am doing this all wrong, and I know it. I have been trying to work up the courage to tell you how I feel for weeks now, and this is not how I imagined it happening. But the truth is, I love you. I think I have loved you since the day you showed up at the livery stable with everything you owned in a carpetbag, and hope in your eyes despite everything you had been through. You are the strongest, bravest, kindest woman I have ever known, and I would be honored to call you my wife. Not because some preacher says we should, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. What do you say?" Evangeline could not breathe, could not think. Could only stare at him with tears streaming down her face. "You love me," she whispered. "I love you," he said firmly. "And if Reverend Blackwood will not marry us, then we will marry ourselves, tonight, under the stars. Just you and me and God, who I believe knows your heart better than any preacher ever could." "You cannot do that," Blackwood sputtered. "A marriage must be performed by a minister or it is not valid." "Then we will go to the county seat and file the papers ourselves," Caleb shot back. "A marriage is about commitment and love, not about some man in a collar saying words over us. Now get off my property, Reverend. You are not welcome here." Blackwood climbed back into his buggy, red-faced and furious. "You are making a mistake, Morgan. That woman will bring you nothing but trouble and shame. Mark my words." "The only thing I am ashamed of," Caleb said coldly, "is that I attended your church last Sunday. I will not make that mistake again." The buggy rattled away and silence fell over the yard. Evangeline and Caleb stood facing each other, and she was still crying, unable to stop. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "All of it?" "Every word," he said. "I should have told you sooner. I was afraid you did not feel the same way. Afraid you would think I was just like every other man who wanted something from you." "I do feel the same way," she said, the words tumbling out. "I have for weeks. I love you, Caleb, but I never thought you could love me back, not with my past, not with everything I have done." He closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were something precious. "Your past does not define you. What you have survived, how you have kept your kindness and your strength despite everything, that is what defines you. You are exactly the woman I want to spend my life with, so what do you say? Will you marry me tonight under the stars?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." He smiled then, a smile that lit up his whole face and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest and held on tight, feeling safe and cherished for the first time in her life. They spent the afternoon preparing. Caleb rode to the creek and picked wildflowers, weaving them into a crown for her hair with an endearing lack of skill that made her laugh and cry at the same time. Evangeline pressed her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she had hardly worn because there had been no occasion for it. She pinned up her hair and tucked the wildflower crown into it, looking at herself in the small mirror in her room and hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. She looked happy. She looked like a bride. As the sun began to set, Caleb took her hand and led her up to the top of the highest hill on his property. The sky was a blaze of orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. He had brought a blanket, and they stood on it together, facing each other as the world darkened around them. "I do not know exactly how this is supposed to go," Caleb admitted, "but I figure we should say what is in our hearts." "That sounds perfect," Evangeline said. He took both her hands in his, and in the fading light, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Evangeline Carter, I vow to love you and honor you for the rest of my days." I vow to stand by you through whatever comes, to never judge you for your past, and to build a future with you that is everything we both deserve. I vow to make you laugh when you are sad, to hold you when you are scared, and to remind you every day that you are loved and valued and cherished. You are my home and I am yours. Evangeline was crying again, but they were good tears this time. She squeezed his hands and spoke the words that were written on her heart. Caleb Morgan, I vow to love you with everything I have. I vow to work by your side, to build this ranch and this life with you, to be your partner in all things. I vow to honor the trust you have placed in me, to never forget that you saw me when others looked away, that you valued me when others dismissed me. You have given me more than a home. You have given me hope, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced. It was not, he said softly, and it never will be. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Above them, the stars were coming out in their thousands, a canopy of light stretching from horizon to horizon. And Evangeline thought that she had never seen anything more beautiful, had never felt anything more right than this moment, this man, this love. They stayed on the hill for hours, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and dreaming and planning. They talked about expanding the ranch, about maybe having children someday if they were blessed with them. They talked about growing old together on this land, about building something that would last. And for the first time in her life, Evangeline let herself believe in forever. When they finally returned to the house, Caleb stopped at the door. I meant what I said about your own room, he said. I will not assume anything. We can take this as slow as you need. But Evangeline shook her head. We are married, she said, in the way that matters most. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. He searched her face, making sure. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything, she said. He picked her up then, making her laugh, and carried her over the threshold into their home. That night, they truly became husband and wife, and it was everything Evangeline had never dared to hope for. Caleb was gentle and patient, making her feel cherished and desired, and when she fell asleep in his arms hours later, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The next morning they rode to the county seat, a town called Silverton about 20 miles east. At the courthouse, they filed the paperwork for their marriage, paying the small fee and signing their names in the register. The clerk, a tired-looking man with ink-stained fingers, barely glanced at them as he stamped the document and handed them their marriage certificate. Congratulations, he said in a bored tone, you are legally wed. Outside, Evangeline looked at the certificate with something like wonder. It is real, she said. It is really real. Did you doubt it? Caleb asked, amused. No, she said. But seeing it written down makes it feel even more solid somehow. Evangeline Morgan, I like the sound of that. So do I, he said, kissing her temple. Now, how about we celebrate? There is a restaurant here that serves a decent steak. They had lunch in a small establishment with red-checked tablecloths and good food. They talked and laughed, and Evangeline marveled at how natural it all felt. She had spent so much of her life feeling out of place, like she did not quite belong anywhere. But with Caleb, she felt like she had finally found where she was meant to be. As autumn turned to winter, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Caleb taught Evangeline to ride better, and she became confident enough to help him move the cattle to winter pasture. She taught him how to make proper bread, which he had never quite mastered on his own. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, and every day Evangeline thanked God or fate or whatever force had brought her to that livery stable back in July. But their peace was not to last. In December, Caleb went into town to buy supplies and came back with a troubled expression. What is wrong? Evangeline asked as he unloaded the wagon. Reverend Blackwood has been talking, Caleb said grimly. Apparently he has been telling everyone who will listen that we are living in sin, that our marriage is not legitimate because a preacher did not perform it, and that we are a bad influence on the community. Evangeline felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What does that mean? It means some of the ranchers are refusing to do business with me, Caleb said. Jenkins would not sell me the seed I need for spring planting. Wilson made it clear I am not welcome at the next cattle auction. They are trying to squeeze us out. This is my fault, Evangeline said, her voice breaking. I should never have let you marry me. I am ruining everything for you. Stop, Caleb said firmly, dropping the sack of flour he was holding and pulling her into his arms. You are not ruining anything. Those small-minded fools are the problem, not you. We will figure this out. How? She asked. If they will not do business with you, how can we keep the ranch going? We will find a way, he said. We always do. But as the days passed, it became clear that the situation was more serious than they had thought. Not only were some of the local ranchers refusing to work with Caleb, but Reverend Blackwood was making sure that the story of the scandalous marriage spread far and wide. Evangeline's past was dragged up and embellished with each retelling. She became, in the gossip mill, a wicked woman who had seduced a good man and led him astray. It hurt more than Evangeline wanted to admit. She had thought that by leaving redemption, by starting over, she could escape her past. But it seemed that no matter where she went or what she did, she would always be judged by the worst moments of her life. One evening in late December, as they sat by the fire, Evangeline made a decision. Maybe I should leave, she said quietly. If I went away, maybe Reverend Blackwood would stop this campaign against you. Maybe you could rebuild your reputation. Caleb's head snapped up. What are you talking about? I am talking about saving you from the consequences of marrying me, she said. You have worked so hard to build this ranch. I cannot let you lose it because of me. Evangeline, look at me, Caleb said, moving to kneel in front of her chair. He took her hands in his grip firm and warm. I married you because I love you, because I wanted to build a life with you. I do not care what Reverend Blackwood says. I do not care what those hypocrites in town think. The only thing I care about is you. And if you leave, if you walk away because you think you are protecting me, you will break my heart. Do you understand? But your ranch, she whispered, is just land and cattle, he said. You are my home, you are what matters, we will figure out the rest. She collapsed into his arms, holding him tight. I love you, she said. I love you so much. I love you too, he said, and we are going to get through this together. The solution came from an unexpected source. In January, a man named Thomas Rivera rode up to their ranch. He was a Mexican rancher from the southern part of the territory, well-respected and wealthy. Caleb had done business with him once before and had found him to be fair and honorable. Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, Rivera said, tipping his hat to them both. I have heard about your troubles with some of the ranchers around Redemption. News travels fast, Caleb said warily. It does, Rivera agreed. And I have also heard the rumors that Reverend Blackwood has been spreading. I wanted you to know that I think he is a fool, and I have no patience for men who use religion as an excuse for cruelty. Thank you, Evangeline said softly. I am not just here to express my sympathy, Rivera continued. I am here to offer you a business arrangement. I need a reliable supplier of cattle for my operations down south, and I think you could be that supplier. I am willing to contract with you for the next 5 years, guaranteed, at a fair price. It would be enough to keep your ranch profitable even if the others refuse to work with you. Caleb stared at him. Why would you do that? Rivera smiled. Because I believe in judging people by their actions, not by gossip. You have always dealt with me honestly, Mr. Morgan, and because my own wife was once a woman others looked down upon. She was a servant, considered below my station. My family disowned me when I married her. But she is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will not stand by and watch another man be punished for having the wisdom to love a good woman, no matter what her past might be. Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. You do not know what this means to us. I think I do, he said gently. Now, let us discuss the details of this arrangement. They spent the afternoon working out the terms of the contract. Rivera was as good as his word, offering fair prices and reasonable terms. When he left, Caleb and Evangeline stood together watching him ride away, feeling like they could breathe again. "We are going to be all right," Caleb said, wonder in his voice. "We are," Evangeline agreed, but the trouble with Reverend Blackwood was not over. In February, he appeared at their ranch again, this time with the sheriff from Redemption and 2 other men Evangeline did not recognize. "Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Morgan," the sheriff said, looking uncomfortable. "I am sorry to bother you, but Reverend Blackwood has made some serious accusations. He claims that your marriage is not legal, and he is demanding that Miss Carter be removed from your property." "Her name is Mrs. Morgan," Caleb said coldly, "and our marriage is perfectly legal. We filed the paperwork at the county courthouse. Would you like to see our marriage certificate?" "That will not be necessary," one of the other men said. He was thin and pale with the look of a lawyer. "I am John Hastings, attorney. Reverend Blackwood has retained my services to challenge the legality of your marriage. According to Texas law, a marriage must be solemnized by a minister or an authorized justice of the peace to be valid. Since neither of those things occurred before you filed your paperwork, the marriage could be considered void." "That is not true," Caleb said. "We said our vows before we filed the paperwork. The certificate is just a formality." "But who witnessed those vows?" Hastings pressed. "Who officiated? If there was no proper ceremony, then in the eyes of the law there may be no valid marriage." "The eyes of the law can go to hell," Caleb said. "We are married. We have a certificate that says so." "Perhaps we should take this before a judge," the sheriff suggested. "Let him sort it out proper." "Fine," Caleb agreed. "We will go before a judge, but I am telling you right now, no one is taking my wife away from me." The hearing was set for March, in the circuit court that met in Silverton once a month. Caleb and Evangeline spent the weeks leading up to it in a state of anxious anticipation. They consulted with their own lawyer, a sharp young man named Daniel Foster who had recently set up practice in Silverton. He was honest with them about the situation. "The law in Texas is a bit murky on this point," Foster explained. "Traditionally, marriages had to be performed by clergy or justices of the peace. But there have been cases where common law marriages, where couples simply declared themselves married and lived as such, have been recognized. The fact that you filed the paperwork and received a certificate works in your favor. But Reverend Blackwood's lawyer will argue that the certificate was issued in error, that without a proper ceremony there was no marriage to certify." "So what are our chances?" Evangeline asked, her stomach churning. "Better than even," Foster said. "Especially if we can show that you have been living as husband and wife, that you are committed to each other, and that the marriage was entered into in good faith. The judge will have discretion in how he interprets the law." The day of the hearing arrived cold and clear. The courtroom was packed, which surprised Evangeline until she realized that Reverend Blackwood had made sure everyone knew about it. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to humiliate them. Judge Marcus Aldridge was a stern-looking man in his 60s, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes. He listened as Hastings presented Reverend Blackwood's case, arguing that the marriage was invalid and that Evangeline should be forced to leave Caleb's property to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Then Foster stood to present their side. He called Caleb to the stand first. "Mr. Morgan, please describe for the court the events of October 15th of last year." Caleb sat straight in the witness chair, his voice clear and steady. "That was the day I asked Evangeline to marry me. Reverend Blackwood had come to my ranch and told me that her living there was sinful, that she needed to leave. He said he would not marry us because of her past. I told him we did not need him, that we would marry ourselves. That evening, Evangeline and I went to the top of the hill on my property, and we exchanged vows. We promised to love and honor each other for the rest of our lives. Then, the next day, we rode to the courthouse here in Silverton and filed our marriage certificate." "And in your mind, Mr. Morgan, are you married to Evangeline?" "Absolutely," Caleb said without hesitation. "In every way that matters. Thank you, no further questions." Hastings stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Morgan, was there anyone else present when you exchanged these supposed vows?" "No, just the two of us." "And no minister or justice of the peace officiated?" "No." "So what you did was simply make promises to each other, correct?" "How is that different from any other promise two people might make?" "Because we meant it as a marriage," Caleb said. "Because we committed ourselves to each other before God and then followed through by making it legal the next day." "But you admit there was no proper ceremony." "If by proper ceremony you mean some preacher who did not know us or care about us saying words out of a book, then no. But if you mean a sincere exchange of vows and a commitment to each other, then yes, there was a ceremony." Hastings sat down, looking satisfied, and Foster called Evangeline to the stand. She was terrified, but she forced herself to walk steadily to the witness chair and take her seat. "Mrs. Morgan," Foster began gently, "please tell the court about your relationship with Caleb Morgan." Evangeline took a deep breath. "Caleb saved my life," she said. "I had been forced to defend myself against a man who tried to hurt me, and I was going to be run out of town. Caleb offered me a place to stay and honest work. He treated me with more kindness and respect than anyone ever had. Over time, I fell in love with him. When he asked me to marry him, it was the happiest moment of my life." "And do you consider yourself married to him?" "I do," she said firmly. "He is my husband in every sense of the word. Thank you, no further questions." Hastings approached for cross-examination, and Evangeline braced herself. "Miss Carter," he began, deliberately using her maiden name, "is it true that you worked as a saloon girl in Redemption?" "I did," she said. "And is it true that you shot a man in that saloon?" "I shot a man who was trying to assault me," she corrected, "but you did shoot him." "Yes." "And is it true that you lived in Mr. Morgan's house for 3 months before this alleged marriage took place?" "I worked as his housekeeper," she said. "I had my own room." "But you lived under the same roof with a man to whom you were not married." "Yes," she said, feeling her face heat. "So you can understand why Reverend Blackwood and others might question the propriety of the situation." "What I understand," Evangeline said, her voice shaking but strong, "is that Reverend Blackwood would rather see a woman homeless or dead than living honestly and working hard. I understand that he would rather judge people for their pasts than celebrate their attempts to build better futures. And I understand that he uses religion as a weapon to hurt people, not as a source of love and redemption." There was a murmur through the courtroom. Hastings looked taken aback. "That is not a question I asked, Miss Carter, and yet it is the truth," she said. "No further questions," Hastings said, returning to his seat. Foster stood again. "Your Honor, I would like to call one more witness, Thomas Rivera." Rivera entered the courtroom and took the stand. He testified about his business dealings with Caleb, about the contract he had offered them despite the rumors. "I believe that Mr. and Mrs. Morgan are truly married," he said. "I have seen how they are together. I have seen the love and commitment between them. That is not something you can fake." Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Hastings went first, arguing that the law was clear, that without a proper ceremony the marriage was not valid and that the court should declare it void. Then Foster stood. "Your Honor, the law exists to serve justice, not to punish people for technicalities. Mr. Morgan and Mrs. Morgan exchanged vows, committed themselves to each other, and filed the proper paperwork. They have lived as husband and wife for nearly 5 months. They have built a life together. To declare their marriage invalid now would be a grave injustice. It would say to them and to others that love and commitment do not matter, that only ritual and ceremony count. But I believe this court knows better. I believe you can see that these two people are truly married in the only way that matters, in their hearts and their commitment to each other. I ask you to uphold their marriage and allow them to continue building their life together." Judge Aldridge sat in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "I have listened carefully to the arguments presented today. This is indeed a complicated situation. The law regarding marriage in Texas has traditionally required a ceremony performed by an authorized individual. However, the law also recognizes common law marriages in certain circumstances. And the purpose of the law is not to tear apart couples who are genuinely committed to each other, but to ensure that marriages are entered into seriously and with full legal standing. He paused, looking directly at Caleb and Evangeline. I have observed the two of you today. I have heard your testimony, and I am convinced that you entered into this marriage in good faith, with genuine love and commitment. The fact that Reverend Blackwood refused to perform the ceremony is, in my view, more a failing on his part than on yours. You did what you could to make your marriage official by filing the proper paperwork the very next day. Evangeline held her breath. Therefore, Judge Aldridge continued, I rule that the marriage between Caleb Morgan and Evangeline Carter Morgan is valid and legally binding. The marriage certificate issued by this county stands. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Evangeline felt Caleb's arms around her, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. They had won. They were truly, legally, undeniably married. Reverend Blackwood stormed out of the courtroom, his face purple with rage. But Evangeline did not care. Let him rage. He had lost. Outside the courthouse, Thomas Rivera shook their hands. Congratulations, he said warmly. Now perhaps everyone can leave you in peace. Thank you for testifying, Caleb said. It meant a great deal. It was my pleasure, Rivera said. Now go home and celebrate. They did exactly that. On the ride back to the ranch, Evangeline felt lighter than she had in months. The shadow that had been hanging over them was finally gone. They were married, legally and irrevocably, and no one could take that away from them. That evening they climbed back up to the hill where they had exchanged their vows. The stars were out again, brilliant and infinite. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together looking out over their land. I was scared today, Evangeline admitted. I was scared the judge would side with Blackwood. So was I, Caleb said, but he did not, and now we can put all of this behind us. Do you think Blackwood will give up? I think he knows he has lost, Caleb said. And even if he does not, it does not matter. We have each other, we have this land, we have a future. We do, Evangeline said, turning in his arms to face him, and I cannot wait to see what that future holds. He kissed her, slow and deep, and Evangeline felt a wave of pure contentment wash over her. This was happiness. This was home. Spring came, and with it, new life. The cattle gave birth to healthy calves. The seeds Caleb had managed to buy from a supplier in another county sprouted and grew. And in early April, Evangeline realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening after supper. He had been talking about his plans to build that barn he had mentioned when they first met, and she interrupted him. Caleb, I have something to tell you. He looked at her, caught by the tone of her voice. What is it? Is something wrong? Nothing is wrong, she said, a smile spreading across her face. Everything is right. We are going to have a baby. For a moment he just stared at her, then a grin broke across his face, wide and joyful. A baby? Are you sure? I am sure, she said. I have been feeling sick in the mornings and I have missed my courses. There is a baby, Caleb, our baby. He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh. We are going to be parents, he said, his voice full of wonder. Evangeline, this is the best news I have ever heard. You are not worried, she asked when he set her back down. Worried? Why would I be worried? Because raising a child is a lot of responsibility, because we will have another mouth to feed, because everything will change. Of course everything will change, Caleb said, but it will change for the better. Evangeline, I cannot wait to meet this baby, to raise a child with you, to watch you become a mother. She leaned into him, feeling his arms tighten around her. I am going to do everything I can to be a good mother. You are going to be an amazing mother, he said. I know it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Evangeline continued to work around the ranch as much as she could, though Caleb fussed over her constantly, always worried she was doing too much. As summer arrived and her belly grew, she found herself slowing down, spending more time in the house, preparing for the baby's arrival. They turned the small room that had been Evangeline's when she first arrived into a nursery. Caleb built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it until it was smooth and painting it a soft cream color. Evangeline sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her heart full every time she imagined holding her baby. In late summer, Thomas Rivera and his wife, Elena, came to visit. Elena was a warm woman with kind eyes and a ready smile. She brought gifts for the baby, tiny knitted booties and a soft blanket, and she and Evangeline spent hours talking about children and motherhood and life. "I am so glad you came," Evangeline said as they sat on the porch, watching the men inspect the new barn Caleb had finally built. "I do not have many women friends. It is nice to talk to someone who understands." "I am glad we came too," Elena said. "Thomas has told me so much about you and Caleb. I wanted to meet the woman who had caused such a stir." Evangeline laughed. "I did not mean to cause a stir." "The best things in life rarely happen when we are trying to cause them," Elena said wisely. "They happen when we are simply being true to ourselves. You and Caleb are good people who love each other. That is all that matters." "That is what I keep trying to remember," Evangeline said. "But sometimes I still worry that I am not good enough for him, that my past will always be a shadow over us." "Your past is part of what made you who you are," Elena said. "It is part of your story, but it is not the whole story. The whole story is that you survived, that you kept your kindness despite everything, and that you found love. That is what people will remember." "I hope you are right," Evangeline said. "I am always right," Elena said with a smile. "Ask Thomas." They stayed for 2 days, and when they left, Evangeline felt bolstered by Elena's friendship. She was not alone. She had Caleb, and now she had friends who valued her for who she was, not despite her past but as a complete person whose past was just one part of her. In October, as the leaves were turning gold again and the air carried the first hint of autumn chill, Evangeline went into labor. It started in the early morning, a tightening in her belly that grew stronger as the hours passed. Caleb rode for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henley who lived about 10 miles away, and then sat with Evangeline, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "You are so strong." "I do not feel strong," she gasped between contractions. "You are," he insisted. "You are the strongest person I know." The labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the night. But finally, as the moon was rising outside the window, Evangeline gave one last push and a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henley announced, holding up the red-faced, squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." She cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Evangeline's arms. Evangeline looked down at her son, at his tiny face and dark hair, and the way his little fists waved in the air, and she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." Caleb leaned over them, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," he said. "Evangeline, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names for months without settling on one. But now, looking at his son, Caleb said, "What about Samuel, after my father?" "Samuel Morgan," Evangeline said, trying it out. "I like it. Samuel Caleb Morgan." "Samuel Caleb Morgan," Caleb repeated, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Samuel's fingers closed around his father's finger, and Caleb laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Welcome to the world, son." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting but wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and growing, and Evangeline found that motherhood came more naturally to her than she had expected. Caleb was a devoted father, always willing to walk the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, to change diapers, to sing lullabies in his off-key voice that somehow always made the baby settle. Winter passed in a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. But even exhausted, Evangeline had never been happier. This was the life she had never dared to dream of, a husband who loved her, a son who depended on her, a home that was truly hers. In the spring, when Samuel was 6 months old, they had a visitor. It was Reverend Blackwood, and Evangeline's heart sank when she saw him riding up to the house. But Caleb put a hand on her arm. "Let me handle this," he said. He went out to meet Blackwood, and Evangeline watched from the window, holding Samuel in her arms. "Reverend," Caleb said, his voice cold. "What do you want?" "I came to apologize," Blackwood said, and Evangeline nearly dropped the baby in shock. "You what?" Caleb sounded equally surprised. "I came to apologize," Blackwood repeated. "I have been doing a great deal of thinking over the past months. I have come to realize that I was wrong in my treatment of you and your wife. I allowed my own rigid interpretation of propriety to blind me to the truth of your love and commitment. I let my pride drive me to try to destroy your marriage, and that was sinful of me. I am here to ask your forgiveness." Caleb was silent for a long moment. "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why come here now after everything you put us through?" "Because I saw your wife in town last month with your son," Blackwood said. "I saw the way she looked at him, the way she held him. And I saw the way people were talking to her, smiling at her, treating her with respect. And I realized that everything I had said about her, all the judgments I had made, they were wrong. She is not a sinful woman. She is a mother and a wife who has worked hard to build a good life. And I was wrong to try to tear that down." Evangeline came to the door, still holding Samuel. "You hurt us," she said quietly. "You tried to destroy our marriage, you spread lies about me, and you did it all while claiming to be a man of God." "I know," Blackwood said, and he looked genuinely ashamed. "I have no excuse for my behavior. I can only say that I am sorry and hope that someday you might be able to forgive me." "Forgiveness is not something you can demand," Caleb said. "It is something that has to be earned." "I know," Blackwood said, "and I am willing to do whatever it takes to earn it. I have already started by telling everyone I spoke to that I was wrong about you both. I have been trying to undo the damage I caused." Evangeline looked at Caleb, and he looked back at her. She could see the anger still simmering in his eyes, but she could also see something else. Compassion, understanding, the same qualities that had made him reach out to her in the first place. "We appreciate your apology," Evangeline said finally, "but forgiveness will take time." "You hurt us badly, Reverend. That is not something we can just forget." "I understand," Blackwood said, "and I will not trouble you further. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly sorry." He rode away, and Caleb and Evangeline stood together watching him go. "Do you believe him?" Caleb asked. "I think so," Evangeline said. "But that does not mean I trust him, not yet." "Neither do I," Caleb agreed. "But maybe in time we will." Time passed, and their life continued to grow and flourish. The ranch prospered thanks in large part to the contract with Thomas Rivera. Caleb was able to expand his herd, and they even hired a ranch hand, a young man named Jack who was hardworking and respectful. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler, always getting into things and asking questions. Evangeline loved watching Caleb with him, teaching him about the animals and the land, carrying him on his shoulders as they walked around the property. When Samuel was 2, Evangeline discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident, less afraid. She knew what to expect, and she knew she could handle it. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Caleb's sister, was born in the spring of 1879. She had Evangeline's dark hair and Caleb's green eyes, and she was adored from the moment she arrived. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help with her, to hold her, to make her smile. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy. Summer picnics by the creek. Winter evenings by the fire, with Caleb reading stories while Evangeline sewed and the children played. Sundays spent together, just the 4 of them. Treasuring the family they had built over the years, Reverend Blackwood kept his word. He continued to speak kindly of them when their names came up, and gradually, the stigma that had once surrounded them faded. People began to judge them not by Evangeline's past, but by the life they were living in the present. by the strong, happy family they had created, by the respect they showed their neighbors and the hard work they put into their ranch. Eventually, Evangeline and Caleb did forgive Blackwood, though their relationship with him never became more than cordial. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars, and that was one scar that remained. But those scars did not define them. What defined them was the love they shared, the family they had built, and the life they had created together against all odds. In 1885, when Samuel was 9 and Sarah was 6, Evangeline stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching her children play in the yard. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how far we have come," she said. "About how different my life is now from what it was 10 years ago. Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "Not a single one," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Well, maybe one. I regret that I did not meet you sooner," he laughed. "I do not know. I think we met exactly when we were supposed to. Any earlier and we might not have been ready for each other." "Maybe," she conceded, "but I am grateful for every day I have had with you." "And I am grateful for you," he said, "for your strength, your courage, your love. You have made my life richer than I ever imagined it could be." She kissed him, sweet and slow, the kind of kiss that still made her heart race even after 9 years of marriage. Behind them, Samuel made a disgusted sound. "Mama and Papa are kissing again," he announced to Sarah. "Yuck," Sarah agreed cheerfully. Evangeline and Caleb broke apart, laughing. "You two will understand someday," Caleb called to them. "Never," Samuel declared. "We will see," Evangeline said, smiling. That evening, after the children were in bed, Evangeline and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "Do you remember the night we got married?" Evangeline asked. "Up on that hill under the stars?" "I remember every detail," Caleb said. "It was the best night of my life. Well, tied with the nights our children were born." "Mine too," Evangeline said. "I was so scared that night, scared that it was too good to be true. Scared that something would come along and ruin it." "But nothing did," Caleb said. "We fought for this and we won." "We did," Evangeline agreed, "and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Caleb said. He stood and held out his hand to her. "Dance with me." "There is no music," she pointed out, laughing. "We do not need music," he said. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They swayed together on the porch, moving to a rhythm only they could hear, and Evangeline rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was happiness, she thought. This simple moment, dancing with her husband under the stars, their children safe and asleep inside, their future bright and full of promise. She had come so far from that scared woman in the redemption jail cell. She had survived, and more than that, she had thrived. And it was all because one good man had seen past her mistakes to the person she truly was. One good man had chosen to love her, to fight for her, to build a life with her. One good man had married her under the stars and made every promise real. Years continued to pass in gentle succession, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew tall and strong, with his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. Sarah was bright and spirited, full of laughter and curiosity. Evangeline watched them with pride that sometimes brought tears to her eyes, marveling at the miracle that these beautiful souls had come from her. In 1887, when Evangeline was 33 and Caleb was 36, they welcomed another child, a son they named Thomas after Thomas Rivera, whose friendship had meant so much to them. Thomas and Alina became regular visitors to the ranch, and their own children became playmates for Samuel, Sarah, and little Thomas. The ranch continued to prosper. What had started as a modest operation had grown into one of the most successful ranches in the region. Caleb's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock spread, and he was often called upon to give advice to younger ranchers just starting out. He always did so freely, remembering what it had been like to struggle, to build something from nothing. Evangeline had found her own place in the community as well. Her skill with healing herbs and remedies, learned from her grandmother as a child, became known, and neighbors often came to her when someone was sick or injured. She delivered babies, tended fevers, and set broken bones, and she never turned anyone away, regardless of whether they could pay. In 1890, Redemption got a new preacher, a young man named Daniel Worth, who was the opposite of Reverend Blackwood in every way. He was warm and compassionate, and when he heard the story of Caleb and Evangeline's marriage, he sought them out. "I wanted to tell you," he said when he visited their ranch, "that I think what you did was beautiful, marrying under the stars, committing yourselves to each other with such sincerity. That is what marriage should be, not a ritual performed by rote, but a true joining of hearts." "Thank you," Evangeline said, touched by his words. "I also wanted to invite you both to attend services," Worth continued. "I know you may not feel welcome after what Reverend Blackwood did, but I want you to know that my church is a place for everyone. You would be welcomed with open arms." Caleb and Evangeline exchanged glances. They had not attended church regularly since their troubles with Blackwood, preferring to worship in their own way on their own land. But there was something genuine about Daniel Worth that made them willing to give it a chance. "We will think about it," Caleb said. They did think about it, and eventually they started attending services. It was strange at first, sitting in the same building where Blackwood had preached against them. But Worth's sermons were about love and redemption, about second chances and the fundamental goodness of people. And slowly, Evangeline began to feel at home there. The community fully embraced them now. The old rumors and judgments had faded, replaced by respect for the life they had built and the people they had become. Evangeline was no longer seen as a fallen woman. She was seen as a respected rancher's wife, a skilled healer, a devoted mother. Her past was known, but it was not held against her. In 1892, Samuel turned 16 and announced that he wanted to learn to be a veterinarian. "I love the ranch," he said, "but I want to do more. I want to help animals to learn about medicine." Caleb was surprised but supportive. "If that is what you want, son, then that is what we will help you do." They made arrangements for Samuel to apprentice with a veterinarian in San Antonio. It was hard to see him go, but Evangeline was proud of him for pursuing his dreams. Sarah, now 13, was already showing signs of having her mother's healing touch and her father's head for business. She talked about wanting to run the ranch someday, and both Caleb and Evangeline believed she could do it. Little Thomas, at 5, was still figuring out what he loved, but he had his father's gentle nature and his mother's fierce protectiveness of those he loved. In the summer of 1893, Evangeline woke one morning feeling unwell. She was 40 years old, and at first she assumed it was just the natural changes of age. But as the weeks passed and the symptoms persisted, she realized with a mixture of shock and delight that she was pregnant again. "At my age," she said to Caleb when she told him. "I thought we were done having children." "Apparently God had other plans," Caleb said, grinning. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also happy." "Another baby, Caleb, can you believe it?" "I can," he said, pulling her close. "And this one will be just as loved as the others." The pregnancy was harder than her previous ones, her body not bouncing back as quickly as it had when she was younger. But in the spring of 1894, she delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Grace, because that was what she felt like. A final gift of grace after so many years. Sarah, now 15, was a tremendous help with the baby. She doted on her little sister, and Evangeline was grateful for the support. Thomas, now 6, was fascinated by the tiny new addition to the family, always wanting to hold her and make her smile. Samuel came home from his apprenticeship to meet his new sister, and the whole family gathered together. 5 children ranging from 18 to newborn, and Evangeline felt her heart was so full it might burst. "Look at what we made," Caleb said to her one evening as they watched their children together. Look at this beautiful family. We did good, didn't we? Evangeline said. We did amazing, he corrected. As the years passed, the children grew and pursued their own paths. Samuel finished his apprenticeship and returned to the area, setting up his own practice as a veterinarian. He married a sweet young woman named Rebecca, and they gave Evangeline and Caleb their first grandchild in 1897. Sarah took over more and more of the ranch operations as Caleb began to slow down. Not that he was old, he was not yet 50, but years of hard physical labor were taking their toll. Sarah was more than capable, smart, and decisive, and the ranch hands respected her. Thomas showed a talent for working with horses, and he began training them, gaining a reputation for being able to gentle even the most difficult animals. And Grace, their youngest, grew into a beautiful child with a voice like an angel. She loved to sing, and she brought music into their home in a way that delighted everyone. In 1900, Evangeline was 47 and Caleb was 50. They had been married for 24 years, and their love had only deepened with time. They sat on their porch one evening, a familiar ritual, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. Do you ever miss the excitement of those early days? Evangeline asked. When we were young and everything was new and uncertain? Not for a second, Caleb said. I will take the peace and certainty of this life over excitement any day. I have you. I have our children and now grandchildren. I have this land. What more could I possibly want? Nothing, Evangeline said, smiling. I feel the same way. Evangeline, Caleb said, taking her hand. I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard days, she teased. Especially the hard days, he said, because we got through them together, and that made them bearable. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and home. I love you, Caleb Morgan, more than I ever knew it was possible to love someone. I love you too, Evangeline Morgan, more than words can say. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows all those years ago. So much had changed since that night. They had built a life, raised a family, weathered storms, and celebrated triumphs. But one thing had remained constant. Their love for each other. That love had been tested many times. By judgmental preachers and harsh circumstances, by the difficulties of building a ranch and raising children, by illness and loss and fear. But it had never wavered. It had only grown stronger, deeper, more resilient. In 1905, Caleb's health began to decline. He was 55, and a lifetime of hard work had worn him down. He developed a persistent cough that would not go away, and the doctor diagnosed him with consumption. They did everything they could, but the disease was relentless. Evangeline nursed him with fierce devotion, refusing to leave his side. Their children took turns sitting with him, and he used the time to tell them stories, to share his wisdom, to make sure they knew how much he loved them. One evening in late autumn, as the leaves were falling and the air was growing cold, Caleb knew his time was near. He asked for Evangeline to be alone with him, and their children quietly left the room. I do not want to leave you, he said, his voice weak. Then do not, she said, tears streaming down her face. Stay with me, fight. I have been fighting, he said, but I am tired, Evangeline, so tired. I know, she whispered, holding his hand. I know. I need you to promise me something, he said, anything. Promise me you will keep living, really living. Not just existing. You are only 52, you have so much life left. Promise me you will embrace it. I promise, she said, though the thought of life without him was unbearable. And promise me you will remember, he continued. Remember that night under the stars. Remember every moment we have had together. Remember that you are loved, always loved. I will remember, she promised. Every moment, every touch, every word, I will carry you with me always. That is all I can ask, he said. He was quiet for a moment, struggling to breathe. Then he said, Evangeline, marrying you under the stars was the greatest adventure of my life. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "For seeing past everything else to who I really was. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a life I never dreamed I could have. Thank you for loving me. Always," he whispered. "I will always love you, in this life and whatever comes after." He closed his eyes, and with Evangeline holding his hand, Caleb Morgan took his last breath. The grief was overwhelming. Evangeline felt like half of herself had been torn away, but she had made him a promise and she intended to keep it. She would keep living. The funeral was well attended. It seemed like everyone in the county came to pay their respects to the man who had been so kind, so fair, so decent. Thomas Rivera gave a eulogy that brought tears to every eye, talking about Caleb's integrity and his love for his family and his land. They buried him on the hill where they had been married, under the stars he had loved so much. Evangeline stood at his grave with their children around her, and she spoke to him silently in her heart. "I love you," she thought. "I will always love you. Thank you for the life we shared. Thank you for every moment. Rest now, my love. Rest." The months after Caleb's death were hard. Evangeline moved through them in a fog, going through the motions of life but feeling numb inside. But gradually, with the support of her children and friends, she began to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to remember with joy instead of only pain. Sarah ran the ranch beautifully, proving herself to be every bit as capable as her father had been. Samuel's veterinary practice thrived. Thomas married and started his own horse training business. And Grace, at 11, continued to fill their home with music. Evangeline found purpose in her healing work, in helping others, in being a grandmother to the growing number of grandchildren. She kept her promise to Caleb. She kept living. In 1910, on what would have been their 34th wedding anniversary, Evangeline climbed the hill where they had married and where Caleb was buried. She was 57 now, her hair more gray than brown, her face lined with years of sun and smiles. But she felt strong, capable, at peace. She sat by his grave and talked to him, telling him about the grandchildren, about how well their children were doing, about the new foal that Thomas was training. She told him about the sunset she had watched the night before, how beautiful it had been. She told him about everything and nothing the way she had when he was alive. "I kept my promise," she said finally. "I kept living, and I have tried to make you proud." The wind rustled through the grass, and she imagined it was his voice telling her he was proud, telling her he loved her. "I love you too," she said. "I always will." She stayed until the stars came out, those same stars that had witnessed their vows so many years ago, and she felt in that moment that he was there with her, that he had never really left. That their love was stronger than death, more lasting than stone. Evangeline lived for many more years, until she was 73 years old. She saw her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She saw the ranch continue to prosper under Sarah's management. She saw the legacy that she and Caleb had built together continue to flourish and grow. And when her time finally came, in the spring of 1921, she died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children. They buried her next to Caleb, on the hill where they had married under the stars all those years ago. At her funeral, Sarah stood to speak. She was 52 now, the same age her mother had been when her father died, and she looked out at the gathered crowd with tears in her eyes. "My mother once told me," Sarah said, "that she never expected to have the life she had. She never expected to be loved the way my father loved her, or to have children and grandchildren, or to live to see her hair turn gray. She thought her life would be short and hard and lonely. But my father saw something in her that others missed. He saw her strength, her courage, her capacity for love, and he married her under these stars, making a promise that he kept every day of his life. They built something beautiful together, something that continues in all of us who are here today. That is their legacy, not just the ranch or the land, but the love they shared and the family they created, and that is something that will never die." There was not a dry eye in the crowd. They buried Evangeline beside her husband, and on her headstone, her children had engraved a simple message that captured everything about her life. Evangeline Morgan. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she was loved under the stars and beyond them. And so the story ended where it began, under those vast Texas stars. The preacher had said she was too sinful to marry. But the cowboy had married her anyway, and together they had built a love that transcended judgment, that overcame prejudice. That proved that the only thing that truly mattered was the content of two hearts committed to each other. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to tend the land they had built together. And on clear nights, when the stars came out in their full glory, it was said that you could still feel the love of Caleb and Evangeline Morgan on that hill, a testament to the power of choosing love over judgment, of believing in second chances, of having the courage to defy convention for the sake of true connection. The ranch stands to this day, a living monument to two people who dared to marry under the stars when society said they should not, and who proved that real love needs no church, no preacher, no approval from anyone but the two people whose hearts beat as one. Their story became legend in that part of Texas, a reminder that the most sacred vows are the ones spoken from the heart, and that sometimes the most beautiful ceremonies are the ones witnessed only by the stars and blessed by genuine love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the judgment of small-minded men, not the stigma of the past, not the conventions of society. Just two people who loved each other enough to fight for their happiness, to build a life together despite all obstacles, and to create a legacy that would outlast them both. That was the true measure of their marriage. Not the words of any preacher or the stamp of any official, but the life they lived, the family they raised, and the love that sustained them through everything. From that first night under the stars to the moment they were reunited in whatever lies beyond. Their story proved what love has always known and what no prejudice can ever diminish. That when two hearts commit to each other with sincerity and devotion, that is more sacred than any ceremony, more binding than any legal document, more powerful than any force that would seek to tear them apart. The preacher said she was too sinful to marry. The cowboy married her anyway under the stars. And they lived happily ever after, in the truest and most complete sense of those words, creating a love story for the ages that continues to inspire long after they both return to the earth beneath those eternal stars.